Well, Perry Creek, as we prepare to look at the Word today, I want to talk to you about an interesting object. Does anyone know what this is? Fishing sinker? Okay, look at it very closely. Okay, very closely. They're getting sleepy. Anybody have any idea what this is? Tom? It is not. It is a plumb line. Okay? Tom, what does a plumb line do? He doesn't know. He's like, I don't know. Yes. Okay, so it gives you a true vertical line. The weight on the end of this line, which is called a plumb bob. It was a trick answer. It's just fun to say plumb bob. Say it. Isn't that fun? Okay, anyway. The weight on the end of this, which is called a plumb bob, is arranged in such a way that the line it hangs from will be completely vertical. So it's a helpful tool. If you've ever framed a wall or hung a door or wallpaper or a picture, you understand the importance of working to a vertical line, right? So it's a helpful tool. And if you don't have a plumb line, you can get into all sorts of trouble. So you get doors that don't close right. You can get corners that don't come together. You can get wallpaper that doesn't line up and pictures that look crooked when you hang them. If you're going to do good work in building, you need a plumb line. You need a guide that shows you the standard you're working to. But it's not just builders that need a plumb line. Churches also need plumb lines. Churches need guiding principles, like concise statements of truth that help ensure that their ministries and their decisions are aligned with their values and really with Scripture. So churches need plumb lines. You may not know it, but we actually have several of these plumb lines here at Perry Creek. So let me give you some examples. I don't know if you'll be able to fill in the blanks, but you might recognize some of these statements, okay? So let's look at the first one. We believe that the Bible is completely no. Maybe I don't have, okay, let me give these to you verbally. All right, there we go. We give it to you verbally, okay? We believe that the Bible is true, that it fits together, and that it is, everybody know, good for us, okay? That's a plumb line. That's a value that we have about Bible. If you understand that statement, you will understand why we preach and teach the way we preach and teach at Perry Creek, okay? So let me give you another one, all right? This one's from our value of community. We want okay, there we go. We're up now. There we go. We want the community to be glad that we're here and blank if we have to go. No, ecstatic. No, sad if we have to go. So that's a guide for how we want to relate to the people around us. We want everybody, even non-Christians in the community, to be glad, to feel like we add to the community. Okay, let me give you a plumb line from our value of mission. We want every member of Perry Creek to find their place in the Great Commission. There we go, Great Commission. Okay, that's a guiding principle for our missions team. Something that we want to accomplish. Lastly, let me give you one from our value of family. So this is from Perry Creek Kids. Our Perry Creek volunteers in the kids department are having lunch in the cafeteria after the service today. And I have it on good authority that this plumb line will show up in that meeting, okay? We want kids at Perry Creek to know, grow, and go, right, okay? So we want them to know Jesus, grow in their faith, and go to their community and their world. Okay, so those are some of the plumb lines, some of the guiding principles, statements that we build to that help us evaluate what we're doing. They are plumb lines that we use as we build the various parts of Perry Creek. Well, today, we are going to start a new sermon series. It's from Matthew chapter 10, like Kelly said. This is the next section as we go our slow trek through the book of Matthew. And this series is called The Commission. So Matthew 10 is an entire chapter where Jesus sends the 12 disciples on a mission. And he gives them lengthy instructions about the nature of their mission, about the way they should pursue it, and about the message that they are to carry. He gives them instructions about their mission that help us understand our mission. Our mission as a church and our mission as individuals. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So let me invite you, if you have a Bible, to turn to Matthew chapter 10. Gospel of Matthew chapter 10, near the beginning of the New Testament. Today, we're just going to look at the first 15 verses of this chapter that is a commission. And as we do, we're going to see three plumb lines, three guiding principles that help us know how to pursue our mission for Jesus. And these plumb lines are going to come together to guide the way that we view our mission as a church and the way that you view your mission as an individual, okay? So let's read our chapter. Now, as we come to Matthew 10, let me kind of set the table for you. So Matthew has introduced us to Jesus in chapters 1 to 4 of his gospel. In chapters 5 to 7, he gave us Jesus' central teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, teaching that amazed the crowds because it had authority. Then in chapters 8 and 9, if you remember, Jesus showed his authority. People were once again amazed as he healed the sick and raised the dead, cleansed lepers, cast out legions of demons. Jesus showed his true authority. So now as we come to chapter 10, Jesus gives us some of that authority to his disciples, and he sends them on an important mission. So let's listen to what Matthew says in verses 1 to 15 of chapter 10. And he, Jesus, called to him his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and every affliction. The names of the 12 apostles are these: first Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, James the son of Zebedee and John his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out, instructing them, "Go nowhere among the Gentiles," non-Jewish people, "and enter no town of the Samaritans, but rather go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and proclaim as you go, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers, cast out demons. You received without paying, give without pay. Acquire no gold or silver or copper for your belts, no bag for your journey, or 2 tunics or sandals or a staff, for the laborer deserves his food. And whatever town or village you enter, find out who is worthy in it, and stay there until you depart. As you enter the house, greet it. And if the house is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. And if anyone will not receive you or listen to your words, shake the dust from your feet when you leave that house or town. Truly, I say to you, it will be more bearable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for that town. Well, that is an interesting passage, isn't it? I don't know about you, but when I read that, I have all kinds of questions about what Jesus is saying here, right? Questions like, why are the disciples specifically told not to go to Gentiles or Samaritans? I thought we're supposed to go to everybody, right? And why does Jesus tell them not to take extra clothes or shoes or a walking stick or money? And what is this business of greeting a house, okay, and wishing it peace? You know, how does that work? So let me just say, if you're in my Bible study methods class, that should bother you, right? That's weird when you read this stuff. It should bother you. You should wonder what it's all about. All right, so we have these questions, right? And we'll answer those questions as we go through these 3 plumb lines that the passage gives us. But before we jump into the details of this passage, I just want to point something out that is very basic, but very important if we want to understand how this passage relates to us. And it's this: we all have a mission. Okay, we all have a mission. When we read our passage, the first thing we see is that the disciples have a mission, right? So they have been accompanying Jesus and watching him as he has done the works of the kingdom and as he has preached the words of the kingdom. And now as the passage begins, Matthew lists the 12 disciples for us formally, just so we'll know who they are. And then Jesus sends them on a mission to do the works of the kingdom and speak the words of the kingdom, just like he did. So we could see in the passage that the 12 disciples have a mission. But it goes beyond that. Later in his ministry, Luke tells us that Jesus sent a larger group, 72 disciples, that's 6 times 12, on another mission that was similar to minister in Galilee and go before him in the towns he was going to minister to. So he sent a larger group. And then at the end of Matthew, after Jesus has died and risen from the dead, he gathers his disciples and he says something that is very familiar to us here at Perry Creek. So look at what Jesus says in Matthew 28, 18 to 20. All authority, notice it's now all authority, in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always, even to the very end of the age. So that is called the Great Commission. And it wasn't just given to the 12 disciples. All of Jesus' followers have this mission. It's a much bigger mission, right? This is to the whole world. And you could tell that this is given to all of Jesus' followers because Jesus says to the people he's commissioning, I will be with you to the end of the age. The age hasn't ended yet. So just like the disciples had a mission, we also have a mission. Ours is bigger. It has some differences to theirs, but the fundamental principles or basic guidelines, the plumb lines that apply to them, apply to us. So we all have a mission. And let me say, if you're a Christian, you have a specific part that God wants you to play in that mission of making disciples from all nations. Okay, I don't know what your part is. That's for you to work out with the God as you pray and read your Bible. Some people are called to go to faraway places, like the Howards. 2 or 3 weeks ago, we sent them to Ireland, right? They were called to go there. We have a team right now that's in Honduras. They were called to go and serve there. So maybe that's your part. Or maybe your part is to pray. Like the prayer teams that pray for our various missionaries and for our short-term trips. Some people are called to give generously toward missions. Maybe God gave you the wisdom to know how to make money. Some people are good at it, they tell me, okay? If you're one of those people, then you're called to give, right? Some people are called to local evangelism. To share the gospel with their neighbors. Some people are called to encourage those who go. Some are called to be good senders, to work on the logistics of supporting missionaries like our missions team does. Okay, so listen, I don't know what your specific part is, but I guarantee you have a part to play. And our mission team Plumblines says we want you to find your place in the Great Commission. That's what we mean. We believe that you have a part, a specific part in fulfilling the Great Commission. Okay, so we all have a mission. So the question is, how do we fill our part? Our place in missions to best advantage. How do we evaluate what we're doing for missions? What are the plumb lines that can be used to guide us as we serve? Well, the passage gives us 3 plumb lines for mission. So if you read the passage, there are lots and lots of commands. There's actually 18 direct commands that Jesus gives to the apostles in these 15 verses. So there's lots of these. Some of these commands relate pretty directly to us, like announcing that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. We knew that, right? Some of these commands don't relate so directly to us, like the command not to take 2 walking sticks. You don't have to worry about that one, okay? If you want to take 2 walking sticks with you, knock yourself out, all right? So some of these apply directly, some less directly, but I think if you really look at these commands, they all boil down to three values, three truths that underlie these commands, three plumb lines that relate to everyone. They relate to the 12, they relating to the 72, and they relate to all of us. So the passage gives us three plumb lines. Okay, so let's start plumbing. See what I did there? All right. So the first plumb line we see in the passage is this: our mission is urgent. Our mission is urgent. So one of the main things Jesus communicates to the disciples in our passage is urgency about their mission. Jesus gives them a very specific mission to do, and he tells them to do it in a very specific way. Look at what he says in verses 5 and 6. These 12 Jesus sent out instructing them, go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. They were only to go to Israel. They were not to go to Samaria. They could talk to Samaritans, but they were not to go to Samaria or to any of the Gentile, the non-Jewish areas around them. They were only to go to Israel. Very specific. And then look at what Jesus says in verses 8 and 9. Acquire no gold or silver or copper for your belts, no bag for your journey, or 2 tunics, or sandals, or a staff, for the laborer deserves his food. So Jesus is saying, don't take time to gather a bunch of gear. Okay, the word acquire in that verse relates to getting stuff from scratch, okay, to procuring. And he's telling the 12, don't raise a bunch of funds. Don't take a big bag and a bunch of stuff you have to pack with you everywhere you go. Be quick. What he's telling them is that their mission is urgent. Don't go anywhere but Israel, and don't waste time trying to gather stuff for your journey. He's telling them to hurry and to go through the towns and cities of Israel. Okay, now why would Jesus tell them that? Why would he be so insistent that they hurry to go only through the towns of Israel? Is it because God doesn't love the Samaritans and the Gentiles? Is it because Jesus does not want to offer the kingdom to them? Because it kind of sounds that way, doesn't it? Well, actually, it's the exact opposite. Jesus wants them to hurry because the Gentiles are waiting. See, Jesus knows something. In just a few verses, he's going to tell the disciples, you won't finish going through the towns of Israel before the kingdom comes, by which I think he means before his resurrection happens. So in other words, he's saying, you're not going to finish going through the towns of Israel before I give the Great Commission. And here's the thing, the Great Commission has an order to it. It's given in all 4 Gospels and the book of Acts, and there's a particular order to it. The gospel was to be taken first to the Jews, then to the Samaritans who were half Jewish, and then to the uttermost parts of the earth. The gospel had to go to the Jews first. And it makes sense, right? They were the ones who carried out God's temple worship. They were the ones who, brought God's word to us. They were the ones who brought the Messiah into the world. They had been God's chosen people for centuries. And as such, they were given the first right of refusal on God's kingdom. The gospel was to go to the Jew first, and only then to the Gentiles. By the way, we see this pattern in the book of Acts where it tells us the history of the church. But whenever Paul went into a Roman city, the first thing he did was go to the synagogue and talk to the Jews. And only after they had rejected the gospel would he turn and go to the Gentiles. And the idea is Israel gets it first, but then the Gentiles take their turn. Okay, so here Jesus tells his disciples to focus urgently on Israel, and he tells them that not because he doesn't care about the Gentiles, but because the Gentiles are waiting. They're waiting eagerly for the gospel. And let me ask you something. How does Israel respond when the gospel comes to them? Right? Seriously, they're resistant. They're like, I don't know about this. How did the Samaritans respond when the gospel came to them? You remember the story in John 4, the woman at the well? As soon as she talks to Jesus, she runs back to the city and she tells a bunch of people. And John says they all came out, many believed. And then he says, then they turned around and they went back into the town and many more believed. And the Samaritans end up begging Jesus to stay in Samaria. Jesus takes one look at Samaria and that's when he says the fields are white unto harvest. They were waiting. What happens when the gospel goes to the Gentiles? Think about Paul's ministry. It was the same in almost every city, right? The Jews hear the gospel and they're kind of like, I don't know, I think maybe you're stirring up trouble. And then the Gentiles hear it with gladness and they turn to Christ. Okay, so you can see the pattern here. Look, let me say, just so we understand, this is actually Matthew's point. Think with me about our study of Matthew. What has already happened in Matthew when the Gentiles have been exposed to the gospel? Well, think about the Magi, right? The wise men, they were Gentiles. When they heard about Jesus, we think they rode thousands of miles to come and worship him. When the Roman centurion heard about Jesus, he exercises faith that is so great that Jesus says, I haven't seen this kind of faith in all of Israel. There's a demon-possessed man in Gadara. He hears about Jesus. Jesus delivers him, and he wants to become one of the 12. Guys, the point is this. The world is waiting. The fields were white unto harvest. Jesus is saying there are Samaritans and Gentiles who have not heard about God's kingdom that are just waiting, and they will respond. So Jesus tells the disciples to hurry up. He says, look, there needs to be a sense of urgency. That's what Jesus would say to his 12 disciples about their mission. Do you know what I think he would say to us about our mission? Same thing. I think he would say, look, the door is open. You could go to the Gentiles, but hurry. They're waiting. Be urgent in your mission. I mean, guys, we've done some work, right? Many people have heard about Jesus and turned to him. But did you know there are 4,400 people groups in the world that have never heard the gospel? And there are 3 billion people on this planet who have no idea who Jesus is. There are 1,200 languages where they have no Bible of any kind. Now listen, they're in the hard places of the world. Okay, the easy places have already been reached, but they're waiting. They're waiting like the Samaritans and the Gentiles of the Apostles' day. Many of them are wide open and ready to receive the gospel, right? They're not like so many people in our culture who are like, yeah, I've heard of Jesus. I don't know about him, right? It's not like that. You know, there was a documentary made in the late 80s called E-Tau. Okay, so it chronicled the story of a missionary couple that went deep into Papua New Guinea to share the gospel with a tribe in the jungle that had never heard. And it's really interesting. They spent months telling them the story of the Bible. They didn't rush into it. They started out with creation. Every day at the end of work, everybody would gather and they tell them about creation. And then they would go through the story of Abraham and then Moses and King David and the prophets. And they used object lessons to help them understand things. And then when they got to the part about Jesus, the missionary had someone play the role of Jesus. And he lifted the guy up on a cross. And you know, they show footage of him explaining how the soldiers speared Jesus. And as you look at this, you're seeing somebody hear the story for the first time. And you can see the shock and the shame in their faces. Then you could tell they're just going, why would anyone do this, right? So he tells them about that, and you can see how sad they are, but then he tells them about the resurrection. And that Jesus paid for their sins. And this entire village starts jumping up and down, Somebody comes forward and goes, Jesus is my sin bearer. And next thing you know, somebody else comes forward and goes, me too. I used to do this. I'm going to walk away from it. I'm going to follow Jesus. And next thing you know, the entire tribe is jumping up and down. And this goes on for hours. They're like literally lifting the missionary up and some of the guys in their tribe, and they're throwing them in the air and all this kind of stuff. It's incredible. Guys, they were waiting. Okay, they were waiting on someone like us who has the gospel and the resources to go and share it with them. And Perry Creek, let me just give you a little context for this. This is from Papua. This is where Gilbert Mbiri, our former worship leader, is from. This is his people, his part of the world. He was with us because somebody went to the hard places and reached his village. Don't you think they deserve the chance? Guys, we're waiting. And too much of the time that they're waiting, and too much of the time we're distracted. We're thinking more about our 401ks and whether we're going to be totally comfortable in retirement. We're thinking about the size of our house and the model of car that we drive than we are about our mission. And yet we have the gospel. We have access to the training. We have resources to share that with other people. We need to feel urgency about bringing the gospel to the world. We need to feel an urgency about finding our specific place in the Great Commission. Yeah, if you're called to pray, be diligent about it. Right? If your part is to give, do it generously. You want to get to the end of your life and go, well, at least I died with a giant pile of stuff. No, right? If our part is to send, let's be the best sending church in the triangle. And if Jesus is calling you to go, let's say yes and get on with it, right? So the first plumb line, the first guiding principle Jesus gives to the disciples and to us here is that our mission is urgent, right? So we have the second plumb line, and it's this: we have to go in faith. We have to go in faith. Because we have to pursue our mission in such a way that we are operating by faith and not just by sight. We have to do this in faith. So look at Jesus' instructions to the disciples again. Look at what he says starting in verse 8. He says, you receive without pay, give without pay. Acquire no gold or silver or copper for your belts, no bag for your journey, or two tunics or sandals or staff, for the laborer deserves his food. And whatever town or village you enter, find out who is worthy and stay there until you depart. Okay. That's probably the weirdest part of these instructions. But Jesus says in these verses three things that relate to going in faith. Okay, so first, he says, don't charge for your services. All right, so you received without paying, give without pay. In other words, you did not pay me for the works of the kingdom that I did for you, the miracles that you saw and experienced. You did not pay me to tell you about the kingdom, so don't charge others for your words or works. Don't say to them, I'll preach the gospel to you if you give me a $50 bill. Like, I'll heal your broken leg for $50. If it's cancer, it's a little more complicated. That'll be $100. Okay? He's saying don't do that, right? Don't charge for your services. Second, Jesus is saying don't bring a bunch of your own stuff. Okay? The object, he's telling the disciples, is for you to hurry up and get through Israel. So don't take all kinds of backup stuff and things to ensure your comfort. Pack light. So he's saying don't charge for your services and don't bring a bunch of your own stuff. Okay. So the disciples are probably wondering what you and I would be wondering at this point, and that is, how are we going to eat, right? What is it that we're supposed to live on? So Jesus tells them the third thing, which is trust that God will provide, right? He says the laborer is worthy of his food or his supplies, okay? One translation renders it, laborers should be given what they need. In other words, if you work for someone, and this was especially true in Jesus' day, they're supposed to take care of your needs. They're supposed to give you room and board. All the teenagers here are like, yeah, I worked for my parents so hard. guys need to give me room and board. Okay. But anyway, that was the way it worked, right? And so when the disciples are on mission, ultimately they're actually working for God. So what Jesus is saying is God will provide. He will take care of you. And he'll do it through the generosity of people. So when you go to a village, rather than, charging for your services or bringing 500 pounds of extra gear, just trust that God will provide a worthy person, a generous person, a receptive person that will believe the gospel and give you room and board. What Jesus is saying to the disciples is, do this, pursue your mission by faith. And guys, that's a plumb line. Right? Like the disciples, our mission, the Great Commission, is something that we should pursue by faith. We don't have the same restrictions that Jesus gave the disciples. We can go to more than Israel, and it's okay. We can bring some provisions. You can bring extra walking stick or whatever. But we are still to pursue this commission by faith, trusting in God's provision. And that means that those of us who are called to go have to go in faith. When Kelly and I went to Zimbabwe, we did the same thing that the Imiris did when they went to Virginia Tech, the same thing that the Howards did as they got ready to go to Ireland. We had to raise support. We had to trust that God would provide a team of people and churches who would consistently support us so that we could serve abroad. It takes faith to do that. Marion knows. It takes faith, okay? It takes faith for Kirsten Hutchinson, our worker in Karanda Mission Hospital. It takes faith for her to live out at Karanda Mission Hospital in Zimbabwe. I'll tell you, that is a hard part of the world. And she has to believe that God's going to protect her. There's all kinds of diseases. There's all kinds of problems out there. She has to believe that God's got her back, that he's going to watch over her and provide for her. Those who go have to go in faith. But faith isn't just for those who go. Okay, those of us who stay need to pursue our piece of the mission by faith too. It should require faith for us to do what we do for the Great Commission. Some of you are called to give to missions. Okay, everybody that gives regularly at Perry Creek gives to missions because 25% of our regular giving goes to missions. By the way, that's our church's way of saying we're going to pursue this by faith. Right? That's not easy. It's a step of faith, okay? But some of you are really called to give. So you have the means. Do you give in such a way that it requires faith? Do you just go, this won't hurt me, I won't miss it, I can give that? Or do you really think about what God's calling you to do? Some of you are called to pray. Man, you should pray with faith. You should pray specifically and ask God to do amazing things, right? Pray by faith. Some of you are called to share the gospel with your neighbors. We all kind of are, but some of you have that gift. Listen, you should pursue that with faith. You should be courageous about it. Ask God to guide you, show you who does he want you to talk to. Maybe somebody that you thought was your worst enemy. But open your heart up and pursue that by faith. Okay, listen, everything we do, whether we sin or whether we go, whether it's as an individuals or whether it's as a church, everything we do for the Great Commission should require faith. William Carey, who is kind of the father of modern missions, once said, expect great things from God. Attempt great things for God. That's how we should pursue the Great Commission. Okay, so plumb line number 1 is that our mission is urgent. Plumb line number 2 is that we have to go in faith. Now there's one final plumb line, one final guiding principle, and it's this. Our message is vital. Our message is vital. And when I say it's vital, I don't just mean that the gospel is important. I don't just mean that it should be a priority. I mean the gospel message is a matter of life and death. Jesus closes this portion of the commission on a sobering note.
Look at what he says in verses 12 to 15. As you enter this house, the house, greet it. Okay.
And if the house is worthy, let your peace rest upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. And if anyone will not receive you or listen to your words, shake the dust off your feet when you leave that house or town.
Truly, I say to you, it will be more bearable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for that town.
Jesus is telling the disciples, when you enter a house, to share the gospel, wish that household peace. Offer them God's shalom. Offer them his forgiveness, his blessing, his life. In other words, share the gospel with them, right? And if they receive it, well and good. But he says if they won't listen to you, if they reject your message, take off your sandals and shake the dust off your feet. Now, I know that sounds like a bizarre thing to do, okay? But that was actually a long-standing biblical custom. It relates to being on holy or unholy ground. You know the story of Moses when he went to the burning bush. He took his sandals off as he approached God because he was stepping from unholy ground to holy ground. Jews regularly took their sandals off and shook them out when they left the land of the Gentiles. They regularly took their sandals off and shook them out as they entered the temple. The Apostle Paul literally does what Jesus is suggesting here, and he shakes the dust off his feet in his second missionary journey when the Jews reject the gospel in one of the towns. And the point of doing that was saying this dust is unholy ground. The dust of this place is outside of God's blessing, set for judgment. I don't want to be soiled by it. I don't want to experience even the tiniest part of the judgment that this place is headed for. Jesus tells them to do that. And he says it will be more bearable for Sodom and Gomorrah on Judgment Day than it will be for those towns of Israel. Now, let me tell you something. That is a very serious thing to say. Sodom and Gomorrah was a terrible, wicked place. If you read that story in Genesis, God said, if I could find 10 righteous people, I would spare the city. But they're not there. So it was really bad. They were literally destroyed by fire and brimstone. They were leveled by God's wrath. Now, why would Jesus say about the towns and of Israel that didn't receive the disciples' message it's going to be worse than Sodom and Gomorrah? Weren't there moral people in those towns? Weren't there nice people? Weren't there people that were religious? Absolutely there were. There were people who were so religious that they judged Jesus because they didn't think he was religious enough. So why would Jesus say they're going to be judged more harshly than Sodom? Because the disciples' message is life or death. This is it. This is God's final offer. The people of these towns have had centuries of God's revelation. God gave them the law and the prophets and the sacrifices, and they all pointed to Jesus. They all promised a king who would die for his people's sins and make things right in the world. And the disciples are saying, the king is here. He is gathering his kingdom. And the disciples are telling these people, it's time to choose. You're either in or you're out. And by shaking the dust off their feet, they're saying, you made your choice. We offered you peace with God, and you've refused. Only judgment remains. They're pointing out that their message was life and death. Guys, our message is life and death. Please hear me. The gospel isn't just self-help. It's not some add-on that makes you feel better about yourself. It's not some little thing you can go to make your life even cooler. It's a message of life and death. It's an invitation to join God's eternal kingdom, and it was made at the cost of his son. Listen, God doesn't have anything more to offer. He's given that which was most precious to him, the life of his son, to make us right with him and to give us eternal life. This is it. People go to hell over this. If you're here and you're going, I don't believe all this stuff, it's okay. I'm not saying this to heap condemnation on you. I'm just telling you, this is what God says. And if we don't understand that this is life and death, we'll never pursue the Great Commission the way Jesus wants us to. We won't have the sense of urgency. We won't see the need to step out on faith that the gospel is not a matter of life and death. You know, I've been in churches before where they really struggle to give to missions. I was in one where we tried to get just 10% to missions, and we never even came close. And you know, we talked about outreach and missions and sharing the gospel with people. We even paid a bunch of money to get better at it. But things never seemed to change. And I couldn't seem to figure out why, and then one day it dawned on me. I think for many of the leaders in that church, the gospel was not a matter of life and death. They thought it was good news, helpful news. They believed that Jesus died and rose again. They were happy about that. I think they thought the gospel was a great principle for life, but I don't think they thought it was vital. They didn't think it was a matter of life or death. And if you don't think the gospel is a matter of life or death, the Great Commission will never really make sense to you. I'm sorry, guys, I know this is heavy, but it's what Jesus is saying. If the gospel is just a good idea, the sense of urgency he calls for here makes no sense. If it's just if it's just a good idea, the idea that we need to really step out on faith, it makes no sense. There's no point in going to the hard places. But guys, if we see the gospel for what it is, will we not be compelled? How can we not take our place in offering this to the world? Like the disciples, we have the opportunity to offer peace to the world, right? That's how the disciples did it. Now, they didn't go in there and immediately go, oh, we're going to judge you and we're going to judge you and you're condemned. What's the first thing they do? They offer peace. We have the opportunity to do that. It's only when people self-select it out that they shake the dust off their feet. So we have the chance to offer peace to the world, peace with God, forgiveness and healing, life in his kingdom. Why wouldn't we do that? Let's do it with urgency. Let's do it by faith. Because we have a message of life or death. Let's pursue our mission with these guiding principles. Pray with me. Let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, this is a strong message. It's a strong passage. And it's unsettling. And my prayer is not that we would just feel better, walk out here and shake our heads and say, well, I'm glad that's over. I pray that if it needs to disturb us, that it would disturb us. Lord, I pray that this church would be everything that you call it to be with regards to the Great Commission. I'm so thankful for the work that you've done here, for the joy and the love that I see, for the urgency to go out and share. Lord, I pray that you would just do everything that you want to do in our hearts. Pray that you would be glorified.